All right, so in the last video I asked you guys what is a Western Pacific holiday location that in 2012 was named a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's going to be replicated in my 12-foot coral reef plywood paludarium. Jack Spencer 63 and George F 5968, congratulations, you guys actually correctly guessed Rock Islands of Palau. And if you guys wouldn't mind using the contact email down below on the screen, send me through your contact details and what pellet sizes you'd like to have, and I'll make sure that Frenzy Fish Feeds gets those out in the mail to you. So the Rock Islands are a group of 450 limestone islands that were pushed up by volcanic action from the southern lagoon of Palau. If you can imagine this intricate pattern of island greenery that's linked together by underwater fringing reefs, surrounded by these sort of calm lagoonal waters and protected by an exterior barrier reef. There's no doubt that Palau's a pretty amazing place, and a place that I hope to actually go to one day. But the image that most sticks in my mind is of those individual islands, those mushroom-shaped islands with their overhang of limestone at the water level and that beautiful cap of domed greenery. They're the features that I hope to replicate in this plywood paludarium. One might think that the overhanging rock profile of these islands is formed by the dissolution of limestone through the action of waves and tides. When in actual fact, the erosion's formed biologically from the grazing activities of mollusks, bivalves, chitons and sea urchins as they graze the algae-covered rocks at that intertidal area. That's where they're safe from predators. Now, I'm not going to be installing a tidal system onto my 12-foot plywood reef tank here, but I will be having an intermittent elevation and then decrease of the water level in this tank by, in some cases, up to a good 10 centimetres or 4 inches. Carlson surge devices actually fell out of favour with the invention of the propeller pump and the propeller wave makers that are so common in the hobby today. So the Carlson surge device relies upon having an elevated body of water above the tank. That elevated body of water is consistently and continually fed slowly. Once a certain water level is reached inside the reservoir, a siphon's created. And that's seen initially by a series of bubbles that will be discharged from the pipework, and that's followed by the large gush and surge of water that comes out. I'll be installing 2 or 3 200-litre surge devices above this plywood reef. I'll be making the most of this mezzanine area that runs all the way behind the plywood reef tank. Convenient that, isn't it? Which, if discharged at the same time, not only will create some insane flow throughout the tank, it'll also raise the water level in the tank by a good 10 centimetres or 4 inches and potentially up to about 500 litres. So I can't have my Rock Island paludarium without a classic cap of bright green vegetation, and that's going to be a challenging feature to actually develop and grow and nurture inside my fish shed. Plants just don't like growing inside, as many people will know who have tried to actually grow indoor plants. I will be installing a hydroponic media in the actual island, the dry island itself. I'll be installing an automatic irrigation system coming up through the base of the tank into the island to irrigate the actual plants and potentially provide some misting. I'll also be providing a artificial lighting system with potentially some grow lights at night time. But the plants that I choose have to be tolerant of a semi-shaded condition. They also have to be tolerant of potential salt spray and able to be pruned and clipped into shape. The first is actually Japanese box. It's that classic hedging plant that's common in so many gardens. It's got that nice bright green small leaves. It's really easy to clip into shapes, domes and hedges, but there is a couple of downsides. It really needs full sun. It doesn't like to be in semi-shaded conditions, and although I'm going to be installing artificial lighting, let's face it, full sun, that's 2000 plus par. The other is it's a really slow grower and it doesn't tolerate coastal conditions very well. Morea minmin, which is a dwarf compact version of that very common hedging plant, Morea paniculata, looks very similar to actually Japanese box. It's more tolerant of actually coastal conditions. It will take some semi-shade and it grows a lot faster than Japanese box. But there is a couple of downsides. It does tend to suffer from some nutrient deficiencies, which tend to turn its foliage a little bit pale and discoloured. And the other is, if it actually is doing well, it flowers profusely. And I'm a little bit worried with that much flowering that they might drop down into the actual reef tank itself, and I might have some water quality issues. Carissa macrocarpa desert star. Although the leaves of this plant aren't quite as small and compact as either the Morea minmin or the Japanese box, it still does give that effect. It is a cushioning style plant. It's a subtropical plant from Africa, and it can be clipped into that kind of bun style shape. The other thing about it is it does take some semi-shade. It does tolerate salt spray, and it does also have some nice pretty white flowers that are perfumed, but it's nowhere near as profuse in its flowering as the Morea Min Min, so I don't think I'll have as much of a water quality issue. Now, a rock island can't be an island unless it's surrounded by water. And in the case of this 12-foot reef tank, I'm going to be filling it with a mixture of SPS coral, which is small polyp stony coral, and in particular, staghorns type Acropora. I also love my soft corals, and in particular, the Singularias and those flowy Sarcophyton. Now, being a 4,000 litre reef tank, I'm going to need quite a lot of coral. So I've already begun propagating my own coral from the ones that were in my previous tank. So this is a colony of a coral called a Pocillopora. Quite commonly what happens in tank, you will get a section of the coral that dies off underneath. In actual fact, that's actually a really good example of how corals actually form reefs in nature. As they grow up towards the light and the better conditions in the flow, the coral that's underneath tends to die off, and that actually creates the reef structure itself. But in a reef aquarium, as the coral grows up, you gradually start to see this dead area underneath, and that's not exactly the most appealing. So quite commonly what coral keepers will do, or aquarists will do, is they'll cut off the top healthier branches, use the little cuttings like this, or frags, the fragments, and they'll glue these onto frag plugs or coral discs or rock rubble to create new coral colonies in their aquariums. And one of the things I like to do is actually glue multiple fragments of the same coral onto the one piece of rock rubble. And what I found is that they'll actually grow into a faster colony a lot quicker than if you actually had one piece. Believe it or not, this looks brown, but in the aquarium lighting, this is actually a very nice sort of a mauve purple Pocillopora. Now, coral itself need a rocky hardscape to grow on. And if you followed my channel for quite some time, you would have potentially seen a video I made on making your own DIY dry rock shapes. If you haven't seen that video, this is it up here. Go back and check it out. And while you're at it, if you like this style of content, subscribe to the channel and tick that bell notification so you'll be advised when I put more videos out in this plywood build series. Now, shout out to my, my sponsors, Frenzy Fish Feeds down in Tasmania. Typical reef keeping bell going off, and we just love those thermostat alarms. frenzyfishfeeds.com.au, my Tasmanian-based fish food sponsor. Don't forget to use the discount code Aussie Aquarist in capitals at checkout, and you'll get 10% off your order. 10% off what is an already fantastic price for an Australian-made fish food containing whole, natural, marine ingredients, not those carbohydrate-based fillers. So remember these guys? Of course, we include cement in the construction of these rocks. We have to leach out the excess hydroxides, otherwise it'll make the tank pH go through the roof. So you do so by soaking it in fresh water. The fresh water, when you first introduce all the rock into it, it'll make that pH go up through the roof. It'll go to about 9 probably. You want to keep on dumping the water out and refilling it until the pH of that bath water goes down to about 7, and then it'll be safe to use in your aquarium. Remember this tank? No? Remember these fish? This is my old wife and Calopa filiformis display that was really quite amazing. It was quite lovely for the time that I actually kept it running. Unfortunately, although the fish did fine, I did have my challenges early on in regards to feeding them, but now they're living life quite happily over in my estuary tank. It was the Calopa, believe it or not, that I had the trouble with. And after the third time of going sexual, puffing out all its spores and turning the tank green, in the process turning itself white and disintegrating, I'd had enough and I stripped out the Calopa and moved the old wires over into the estuary tank. So this tank now has become just a bit of a holding zone, really. It was handy having it here, and I managed to chuck in a whole bunch of the live rock that came out of my mixed reef display when I stripped it down. But it's actually now formed the basis of a little bit of an experiment. So I love fish. In particular, I often love fish that aren't so commonly thought of as being suitable for keeping in our reef aquariums, and in particular butterfly fishes and angelfishes. I've kept quite a few butterfly fishes, particularly over the years. I have 4 butterfly fish at the moment. I have 2 juvenile Auriga or threadfin butterflies, which I collected myself down at a local estuary. And I've also got 2 adult or sub-adult dusky butterfly fish, which are the nice sort of charcoal charcoal grey to black disc-shaped ones with that lovely yellow and orange marking on the tail and the snout. And those guys I also collected at night time spotlighting. They're very shy at the moment. They've only just settled into this, this holding tank with a live rock rubble. It's a perfect tank for them actually, with all these plenty of hiding places. And they've shown zero interest in the corals that I have put in this tank so far. So I've got some fluffy corallimorphs or mushrooms. I've also got some zoanthids, some soft coral in the form of the cookies and cream or the chocolate cladiella. And I've also got a large polyp stony coral, which is often thought of to be the prime target for coral eating fish, and that is a Micromusa lordhowensis, commonly known as an acan, or previously known as an acan. And they do often form the target of coral nipping activities in a reef tank. So my plan is to actually watch these guys. I'm feeding them on smashed up mussels and prawns, just to get them feeding quite nicely, because butterfly fish can be quite timid. They are feeding well. They haven't started feeding on any of the corals, and I will continue to add other corals to this tank, such as simularias and sarcophytons, some of the big leather corals, and then eventually I'll move on to some of the small polyp stony branching corals, such as Acropora, probably Acropora dallas, and even some Possilopora or Ceratopora. And I'll just see what, if anything, they'll actually eat. I expect them to nip, but I actually don't expect these guys to eat the corals, with a possible exception of the Micromusa down the end. Most of this style of butterfly fish are not true corallivores in nature. There certainly are specific species of butterfly fish which solely feed on coral polyps in the wild, and I do not want to play with any of those species. But there's a great big realm of butterfly fishes which are generalists in the wild. They feed on tube worm, they feed on polychaete worms, they feed on echinoderm feet such as sea urchins and sea star feet. They'll feed on microcrustaceans. And they will nip at coral polyps or anemone polyps in the wild. These species are much more generalised in their feeding habits and don't tend to chow down on one particular item at any one time. At least that's my experiences, and I have experienced both of these butterfly fishes previously in aquariums. I'd like to try Merton's butterfly fish. Next week I'm getting 2 butterfly fish down from Cairns Marine through my local fish store. Shout out to Fanatics Marine Port Macquarie, on you Gavin. Gavin's getting me down a Mueller's butterfly fish, which is a relative of the copper band, and also an orange banded coral fish, which is it's a bit of an oddball one, Caradium chrysozonis. You don't very often see it in the trade. Both those types of butterfly fish tend to feed heavily on sponges and microorganisms in the wild and not coral, so I expect them to actually do fairly well. I may even branch out and have a go at trialling some angelfish through this tank. I particularly like to get a large angelfish species and some dwarf angels into my reef tank. I'd love to try an annularis angel in this experimental setup and just see what corals, if any, it would eat. This way, I don't have to experiment with my big 12-foot reef tank. I can do the experimenting in here, and any fish which prove to be a little bit too risky to put into that big tank, I can keep in this tank here and just set it up specifically for them. Jack and George, don't forget to send me through by email your contact details and your preferences for the Frenzy Fish Feed prize that you've earned. And to everyone else, thanks very much for watching along. I hope that I've actually sufficiently given you my master plan that's up in my mind. Know I've held out and held back a lot of the technical information, because you have to come back next time and watch when I actually start construction on the actual sheeting and waterproofing of the tank behind me. You may have noticed that I've actually installed a back wall. I haven't talked about that, so that's going to come next time. Don't forget, if you like this style of video, if you're interested in joining along for the entire build process, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe to the channel, tick that bell notification so that you will get notified when the next video comes out. Now, I'd like to get a few more views on some of these videos. The last one I put out gave me about 1,500 views. So I'd like to get a few more than that. Do me a favor, go and show this video to your significant other, your wife, and see if you can actually get permission to build your own plywood reef tank. That way all this will come to fruition in your own fish shed or your own fish room. And also, I'll double my views in the process. So go do that. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you probably in about 7 days' time, and I'll be starting to sheet and waterproof this tank behind me. I'll see you then.